Hey guys, Mark with Thick Insurance, and we're going through a series for the homeowners. If you haven't started at the beginning, which is coverage A, I recommend you click the link below and start from the beginning. If you're interested in buying a cup of coffee and supporting the channel, that link is down there as well. Little plug there. So we're going to talk about what a homeowner's policy does not cover. In most situations, we talk about what's good and great and what you need and all the additions, but a lot of people don't realize some of the parts of a home policy that isn't covered on your policy. Some of them you can add additional coverage to get coverage for. So let's dive into it. The first part is Ordinance of Law. Now, I normally see this coverage in almost every scenario only because whenever I sell a home policy, I do an endorsement or I do a package. It gives you an additional coverage for a lot of things. Mainly water backup is included with it, but it also includes Ordinance of Law. What Ordinance of Law is essentially codes. When they built your house in whatever year they built it, they had a set of guidelines. They could only run the electrical a certain way to get to an electrical box, or a pipe for the exhaust, or whatever the case is. Well, those change over time and they find better ways or find flaws in the ways that they did them before. So the new laws, when a builder goes in and starts working on the house, they have to follow the new code for today. And instead of running this wire in this pipe or whatever the case is, maybe they have to run it a different route. There's a cost to that. That can cost a few $1,000s in addition to your policy. That's not normally covered unless it's endorsed. It's something that you can add on to your policy. Earthquake or earth movement is something that just flat out isn't covered. They do have an earthquake insurance for those that are in California and other states like that have those issues, but that's an additional policy altogether. It's just not on your policy. Some companies, and very few, will allow you to add them as endorsements. They don't normally, because it's usually something that they want to have separate, just because they don't need the liability portion on it and they don't need certain coverages that you normally would get in your home policy. Those are in addition to the actual policy itself. Power failure. If the power goes out, that's not normally covered. It's not an issue where the home had a problem. That's just the way it is. Now, there are coverages that you can add on for food spoilage and equipment breakdown that will cover those, but you got to be very careful with the company that you're going with. Some companies rate those against you. So if the power goes out and you claim $500 worth of food, they're probably have a large deductible, sometimes $100, sometimes $500 deductible, or B, they're going to count that as a claim. And your policy is going to go up more than $500 in that scenario, so it's not worth it. That's not always the case. You have to talk to the agent to find out if that is something that is or isn't rated against. If it's not, then by all means, you file that claim. It doesn't affect you in either which way. Just be careful because the number of claims that you file will affect your eligibility. If you do that more than 2 times in a 3 to 5 year period, you're likely going to get kicked out of that company or they're going to outprice themselves so that you don't want to stay with them in the first place. Neglect is never covered. If you're neglecting anything, really good examples that people don't try to neglect but happens is you have a tree in the yard and it gets termites. If you're not constantly taking care of your property and realizing that tree needs to be cut down or the termites need to be exterminated, then that's neglect. If that tree falls on your house, they're not going to cover that because that was something that you could have prevented. Scenario on the roof, the shingles are lifting up and the rainstorm finally comes in, knocks the shingle off, starts leaking into the roof. Anytime there's problems that show wear and tear over time, unless it's specifically covered, is not going to be covered and they're going to file that under neglect. Water backup or water damage. There's kind of a couple ways that this goes. I'm going to link a video up here that goes over the difference between the 2 ways of water coverage. But in most cases, water damage itself is not covered. If you have a pipe burst, that's a different scenario, which we talk about in that video. If you don't have the endorsement, this can be added as water backup. It's on almost every single policy I sell, and it makes sure that if there is water that's trying to leave the house that backs up into the house and causes damage, that you have at least some coverage for those repairs and the items that you had damaged. That leads into the next part, which is flood. Flood insurance, also a separate policy. Very few and a couple companies will endorse it, but most likely not. It's very rare that you need it unless you're in a flood zone. You would know if you need it. Essentially what happens is the part that's never covered, whether you have the endorsements or whatever the case is flood. If water comes in through the foundation or comes in through the windows, something where the flood or the water level has raised and it's now going into the home. those are pieces that you have to have separately. You're not typically going to need it unless you're in that flood zone where there is a chance of them having those problems. Nuclear hazard is not typically covered as well, so if there is a nuclear hazard, that's just part of it. If the government has to seize the home or step in for any reason, that also is something that's not covered. And lastly, the part that we should hopefully never happen, because if this happens, we're pretty much SOL in the first place, is war. If there's a war and something happens to the home because of that, it's just not a coverage that insurance companies offer. Some additional pieces that go into the non-coverage zone or the excluded pieces is vermin. So if an animal comes in and makes a home in your house, somehow ruins the pipes, does whatever the case is, that also is something that's not going to be named as a peril on that policy. Depending on the type of dog you have, that can make a difference. So some companies don't write vicious dog breeds, and we're going to just put the pit bull out there. Love them, great dogs, but if they ever have to defend themselves, they cause damage. And that's the part that insurance companies are afraid of. Some companies won't even write you if you have that. In other companies, they'll let you exclude the dog, in which case you can just say that the dog is completely out of the picture. If he does bite someone, I'm going to pay the bill myself. And there you have it. Those are the 9+ ways that are exclusions on an insurance policy. Granted, some of them you can fix by endorsing them. Other ones you can just get a separate policy. There are a few in there that you just can't touch. If you guys got great value out of this, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get notified when any video goes live. Otherwise, I'm Mark with Think Insurance. I'll see you in the next one.